Well, good afternoon. We've reached the climax of the course, and we've all revised. Are you ready for the exam? I like doing that with students, and you see their eyes like this. I hope you've enjoyed what you've experienced so far. I certainly have. Certainly our little intimate group, people have come and gone and joined us. What Danny just handed there was my contact details. I'd like us to stay in touch, and please, feedback is the most important thing. If it's something I could have done differently, better, whatever, please be open and honest. More importantly, if there's some stories, if there's information, I mean, I've been sent some wonderful information already. And that's what I'm going to do. That leaflet, you see, I'm going to do it the other way around with my second book, because I'm going to write about the 1906 Springboks and how it was used as a tool of reconciliation, which we're going to talk about a little bit today. And I'm going back to my original studies, my master's degree, etc. But with the Empire War and cricket, what I did was the book came out, and then I realised that this was one heck of a story. So I went around the country and back to the United Kingdom telling this story. And then people would say, well, didn't you think of this? And why didn't you add that? So I'll do it the other way around this time. I've got enough information up my sleeve to at least put on a half-credible presentation, and I know that the rugby fans of this country will be there to certainly offer their advice, their corrections as well, which is important. You can't get the facts wrong in books. Hello, sir. And that's what I'm going to do. So please, if you've enjoyed this and my style of presentation, which is not as rigid as this normally I say I'm done like storytelling and bring it alive. Please keep a lookout for it, because I will be taking this talk around the country, not in the foreseeable future, but certainly in the months to come, because I want to make sure it's a production. So we go into rugby clubs and societies, etc., and things like that. So I'm going to now just sort of test my teeth on the base material, which is based upon what we talked about yesterday. Yesterday we looked at Afrikaner nationalism, and I probably talked in depth about the South African War, the Anglo-Boer War, which you probably didn't think somebody talking about rugby was going to do this week. But for me, that period is one of the most important periods, because it's when it shaped the creation of this game that we're talking about now. So today we're going to look at rugby reconciliation, but of course if you talk about reconciliation, that moment there is one of the most iconic moments probably in world sport, actually. The image of Mandela, of course, handing Pienaar the World Cup trophy in '95. But to understand the significance of that, you have to unpick the history and where it came from. That's just that goes beyond, of course, a man that was imprisoned and who reconciled the country by adopting the emblems and the cultures of his old adversaries. Where did this rivalry start? And of course the fact that we've got a blonde Afrikaans captain there is symbolic as well. Maybe not such a moment if that was an English-speaking South African, but the fact that Mandela encapsulated kind of the period that I'm talking about today as well. So as I said, what I'll do, I've got a lot of pictures up today. We've got a nice leisurely time. Hopefully we've got a time at the end to finish up with a bit of a chat, and then we'll all go off and enjoy our weekend. The iconic image of Nelson Mandela presenting Francois Pienaar with rugby's World Cup trophy in '95, of course, becomes synonymous with the concept of sport as a tool for reconciliation. As a major part of the country's heritage, this paper will explore how South African rugby was used in much the same way in the years before apartheid. Yesterday, of course, we saw how the South African War, or Anglo-Boer War of 1899 to 1902, which highlighted the vast cultural and political differences within South Africa. But sport was increasingly seen at that time as a way to reconcile a conflicted and divided society, in much the same way that sport is viewed today here in South Africa. Indeed, former South African Rugby Board President A.J. Pienaar once reflected that rugby was, and I quote, the greatest cementing influence between the Afrikaans and the English-speaking sections in the country. And when Mark Morrison brought the British Isles team to South Africa in 1903, barely a year after the conflict had ended, it was, according to rugby historian Paul Dobson, a tour of reconciliation. This was, he added, rugby's contribution to healing the sad and painful wounds of the Anglo-Boer War. So based upon years of research within South African and British archives, and of course time spent here in South Africa and at Stellenbosch, I'd like to wrap up this week's lectures by examining the significance of these early sporting exchanges as well as the development of rugby in the pre-apartheid era. Significantly, the post-war tours of 1903 and 1906, the year of the first overseas Springboks, will be examined as early examples of sport being used in South Africa to reconcile the divided society. After all, modern sport in South Africa has been characterised, as we've seen this week, by issues of discrimination and domination ever since it was first introduced by the colonial British in the 19th century. However, while many studies have tended to focus on sport and apartheid and the related issues of racism in the 20th century, today we'll start by focusing on an early period in South Africa's sporting history, a period which I believe shaped many of the social institutions that were responsible for segregation and the establishment of racial hierarchy within the country. At the start of the week, we looked at how the late Victorian period witnessed the establishment of British-style sport throughout the wider British Empire. And in South Africa, of course, this was no different. Upper middle-class sports, such as rugby and cricket, and I mentioned about the class aspect of those two sports, which is so important, and their masculine ideals became entrenched within the colonies as a way of establishing British influence and domination. So having been based in South Africa, of course, myself since the mid-1990s, I've looked at how these ideas, this notion of British sport, spread here to South Africa, and how during these formative years, their identity has been defined. I was inspired by my time at Stellenbosch, and in some ways, I certainly wasn't the first to look at the antagonistic relationship between Brit and Boer, but I think I was probably the first Brit to come here to do it, which was quite an interesting experience. It didn't give me an added insight, but it certainly opened up certain doors, because I had the sense when I was at Stellenbosch doing this research that if this guy's going to tell the story, let's make sure we add our opinion or we open up certain avenues of investigation for me. So it was through rugby, the sport of rugby and early international tours that I will today explore the nature of the complex association of the game with its issues of domination, and as we'll see today, reconciliation. This idea that sport could divide but yet unite. And that's what it does. It's a complex thing. To play sport, you have to have an opposition. You have to have another. You have to have a perceived enemy, as it were, war without guns. But also, as we know, if we've all played sport and been involved in it, it's a great social tool. I mean, we were talking earlier on, myself and Alan, and most of our contacts and most of our leads through business and personal life come through sport, and that's the power of it. So let's go back to where we were talking about these guys. The first British Lions fought to South Africa in 1891. We know that the game having been shaped in the English public schools of the mid-1880s, 1800s, we know it didn't take long for it to arrive here on the shores of South Africa. So by 1891, when these guys arrived, South Africa was a rugby playing nation. People recognised the game. They were playing the rules that had been laid down back in the United Kingdom. As part of the process, it was inevitable, of course, that players here should wish to test the strength of a team, their strength against a team from the mother country. It was the last stage of the diffusion model, remember, beating them at their own game. So in 1891, this was the first opportunity. The historic 1891 tour by W.E. McCladden and his team was the first by a British side on South African soil. Just to make sure you're awake, when was the first cricket tour? You mentioned it yesterday. 1889. So just 2 years prior to the first international tour, which happened to be cricket, these guys arrived. So in South Africa, unlike in the cricket world, they arrived on the rugby stage relatively early. That was quite interesting, because by this stage rugby was now being used as the empire game and being taken around the world. But we know that they arrived in certainly what was going to be a turbulent time in South Africa's political and sporting history. So what was the significance of these early rugby tours? Well, on this British team's departure on the 20th of June 1891, Sir Donald Currie, of course that Scottish shipping magnate in charge of the Castle shipping line, announced that the visits of international teams would do much to cement the friendship of the colonies to the mother country. To him and other imperialists of the day, and I quote, British enterprise was pushing itself forward justly to the natives with due regard to every interest concerned. Well, I don't know if all natives enjoyed this sporting revolution. As I said before, it was relatively exclusive when it first arrived. but it was seen as a virtuous thing. The British were now increasing their influence throughout the world, and they were bringing their sport with them. But little did he know, however, that 8 years later from that statement, that same British enterprise, of course, would have contributed to a major imperial war here in southern Africa. 1891 was an expeditionary tour, a chance to cement colonial relations and to spread the virtues of rugby into new British territory. Against such strong opposition, the inexperienced South Africans, and we've got to remember now, they were all white teams, they were a mixture of British colonials and Afrikaners, so these were playing perhaps a representation of white South Africa. But these guys did not expect to win many matches, but they did expect to share valuable lessons. It was that teacher-pupil relationship at that time. So following their narrow defeat that year, Kimberley won the distinction of being the first recipients of the Currie Cup, donated, of course, by the aforementioned Sir Donald. This was awarded to the team who had produced the best game against the British tourists. The best game against the British tourists. Those who put up the best fight, of course. This trophy, along with the tour, had began to lay the foundations of a third rugby alliance between the two countries. And there's always a matter of debate who won the first Currie Cup, was it Kimberley or Western Province? Technically speaking, the first Currie Cup tournament took place 2 years later. It was the Western Province, but Kimberley was awarded a trophy for the first time because of that performance. It was not that simple, however. These were turbulent times in the history of South Africa, and sport was being affected. With the Jameson raid long thwarted, the next British rugby tour in 1896 had been played against a backdrop of political instability in the country. They may have faced the Afrikaners in friendly rivalry on the field, but the players were left in no doubt that off the field, the rivalry was of a more serious nature. So what was the relationship between Afrikaners and English within South Africa? We went into this into detail yesterday, but let's just summarise again. By 1899, whites constituted only 1/5 of the population of South Africa. It's slightly less than that today, of course. Yet the political and economic power base was held within this minority. However, as well as dominating South African sport at this time, there also existed a cultural division amongst those two groups. As we saw yesterday, most 19th century Afrikaners were men of the country. Their activities largely confined to riding and shooting, of course, which made them such formidable opponents against the British in the war that was around the corner. English-speaking South Africans, on the other hand, tended to organise themselves into clubs within the towns, these exclusive clubs, these that showed off a hierarchy of class, etc. So in sport, and as in other areas of life, these two communities could not be more different. It was the way they were viewing life down here in southern Africa. So for a bit of understanding of how this situation evolved, we should go back, of course, to a wider history of the place we now call South Africa and the developments leading up to the South African War. Well, I can't do that now because I haven't got enough time. But if we look at a brief overview of the history of South Africa, we know that Africans, arguably, some debate this point, migrated south into present-day South Africa some 2,000 years ago, while the Dutch began to settle in and around Cape Town from 1652 with our famous Jan van Riebeeck. However, it was arguably only with the arrival of permanent British control, supported by the weight of British imperial power in 1806, that economic, cultural and political power began to spread throughout the region. Now, given their checkered history, there already existed a deep mistrust between the British and the Boers by the time gold was discovered on the Witwatersrand in 1886, and conflict was never far away. As a result of the gold rush, foreign workers, including many from Britain, poured into the Transvaal. Paul Kruger's republic was being overrun. Cecil Rhodes, the Prime Minister of the Cape Colony, of course did little to appease the situation, and with the intentions of imperial domination throughout South Africa, launched the ill-fated Jameson raid in 1896. Now this, as many historians agree, is a precursor to the Anglo-Boer War. And the main players we have, of course, is Paul up there, Jameson, Sir Leander Starr Jameson, and there he is, the empire builder himself, Cecil John Rhodes. Now the failure of the Jameson raid just only highlighted what was happening at that time. This political tension, the fact that the Boers were sitting on the gold, and the fact that there was going to be conflict perhaps was inevitable. This was a failed attempt to provoke a general uprising of the immigrant workers against the Afrikaners in the north. To President Kruger and his Boers, it only emphasised that the British weren't to be trusted. So sure enough, following the failure of protracted negotiations between Pretoria and London regarding the rights of those workers, the Boers were forced into declaring war against Britain on the 10th of October 1899. Before 1899, Lord Salisbury had predicted that if the Boers had submitted without a fight, they would hate the British for a generation. But if they fought and lost, they would hate them for still longer. This proved to be the case. Yet, as we saw yesterday, it was the way in which the war was conducted that would have long-term ramifications affecting the relation between Anglo and Boer relations here in South Africa. As I explained yesterday, 27,000 Afrikaners were transported overseas to British POW camps in places like St Helena, Ceylon, India, while Kitchener, the British military commander, chose to force the remaining Boers into surrender by introducing his scorched earth policy, which included, of course, camps of concentration for the families of men still on commando. So much to the dismay of countries like France, the British concentration camps proved disastrous. And largely from incompetence, we saw how thousands of women and children had died. Now, this kind of conflict would perhaps even be in a civil war. It split regions, towns, families. They were divided by this conflict. And Afrikaner resentment was especially directed not just to British imperialism, but as much against the English-speaking South Africans who were lumped in with Britain and blamed for what had happened. So as you can imagine, when the war finally ended in 1902, it had left bitter divisions within South African society. This was now truly a region divided. The Boer and the Brits were now further apart than ever before, with their passion for sport seemingly the one thing they had left in common. But sports people, if nothing else, are optimists. And as early as May 1902, just as peace was being signed off in Vereeniging, the South African Rugby Board had talked of relaunching South African rugby with an invitation to the English to tour in 1903. The Association Code, football of course, had also discussed the possibility of receiving an overseas team during this year, and soon plans were forged between the authorities to arrange a series of matches. 1903, the guns had barely fallen silent, and the British were sending their sports teams down. So perhaps 1903 could be seen as a year of reconstruction, as Mark Morrison, here pictured in the centre, the Scottish international forward, led the first fully representative British side to South Africa. The Association Code, soccer, had already arranged for an English football team, the Corinthians, to visit South Africa during the winter of 1903. So as I mentioned, with the guns of the Anglo-Boer War having fallen silent, little time was lost by the South African Rugby Board in arranging their own set of fixtures. At a special general meeting at the Royal Hotel here in Cape Town on the 6th of May 1903, it was decided that representative matches should be played in the Western Province, Griqualand West, and significantly within the former Boer Republic, the Transvaal. It was, as one home periodical reported, the first historic tour to the new, and I quote, British United South Africa. Significantly though, many of the South African teams that the tourists faced in 1903 themselves fielded British-born players. Several had even fought for the imperial forces against the Boer republics, and a number of old acquaintances were renewed during the war. Dr. A. Frood, for example, of Scotland, was South Africa's captain in the first test. So the Springboks had, well, they weren't the Springboks then, had a Scotsman as their captain. Whilst fellow Scots, Saxon McEwen, played in all three tests. So there was a fluid identity of what represented South Africa. This was a bunch of colonials. Most and some had even been born back in the old country. Yet, it was the significance, of course. Within South Africa's ranks, although the likes of Paul Roos and where is he? Yappie Krieger, there he is, the flying ring on the side, and Morkel were of Afrikaans descent, there was a distinct lack of national division between the two squads as a result. So 1903 was fundamentally a colonial tour, one that had been conceived to avoid confrontation and controversy during what was a highly sensitive period, both politically and culturally in South Africa. So despite the timing and significance of the tour, South Africa's Rugby Board viewed the success of 1903 strictly in terms of footballing and financial results. It remains surprising then that very little has been written about it in relation to the Anglo-Boer War. Whether the tour was conceived in terms of reconciliation is open to question. Fundamentally it was organised, financed and played amongst the pro-British, colonial section of South African society, and a means of exerting control, perhaps, in the years following the war. As a result of it, it's been difficult to gauge the significance of the 1903 tour, certainly amongst the Afrikaans rugby-playing population. In purely rugby terms, however, there is little doubt that the results of the tour, and specifically the final victory in Cape Town, began a legacy of South African success that would lead, within a matter of years, to the first ever overseas tour by a South African team. And this leads us on to perhaps the most famous Springboks of them all, in my opinion, the first team. The first ever Springboks, who toured Britain in 1906. But what made this tour so significant? It's what I started to explore when I arrived in South Africa all those years ago. Following the triumphs of 1903, it was inevitable perhaps that thought should again be given to sending a South African squad back to the British Isles. So on his return home in 1903, the British captain, Mark Morrison, had endorsed the view that a fully representative South African team was now more than capable of testing any international side in Britain, and the plan should be made at the earliest opportunity. In September 1905, the tour was officially approved in London, and in December that year, it was resolved that as well as the English, both the Welsh and Scottish unions should also be allowed to host matches against the South Africans. As I will show now, because of the war, this first ever tour by a South African team to England, however, would have added significance. If we look at a map, and we think of a map of South Africa in 1906, it actually consisted of 4 separate British colonies. The Cape Colony, Transvaal now, of course, Natal, and the Orange River Colony. The politicians were still 4 years away from uniting these into a single country, with the nation still racked by division and mistrust, certainly amongst its white population. So to gain a true perspective on this tour of Britain, one should remember that it took place only 4 years after the Anglo-Boer War, and the rugby players, along with sports people from either side, were caught up in this most bitter of conflicts. As I mentioned earlier on in the week, certainly rugby players more than any other sport would have felt the effects of this war. They would have stopped playing the game at any kind of competitive level, and they would have served whichever side they felt that there was their duty to do so. In 1908, sports writer E.J.L. Platnauer described the 1906 tour as, I quote, the most important event that has ever taken place in the history of South African rugby football. For others, however, the significance of the tour went beyond rugby. For the first time, a touring team was fully representative of white South Africa. With the exception of W. Neal, all of the players were born in the Cape Colony. For the first time, the touring team was fully representative of South Africa. With the exception of W. Neal, however, all the players were born in the Cape Colony. So although not representing the whole of South Africa, those colonial born could at least identify a selection, a point made by Platnauer at the time of the tour. This was obviously a sensitivity. The selection of this team undoubtedly was done on merit, but it was also very much representative of the regions. It was highly sensitive that a representative team should be selected. And I think the words of Platnauer here at the time give us that sense. He said, "The men we have sent away to represent us are Afrikaners in the highest sense of the word. They are sons of the burghers of South Africa. They are brought up in the national schools. Almost everyone speaks the language of the country. They are part and parcel of our life and our existence. They are our brothers. Their success is our success. Their joy is participated in by every one of us." So this idea that this was the first representative side that would represent South Africa or the colonies of South Africa. More significantly, perhaps, the team contained players who had actually fought on the side of Her Majesty during the war. Men such as Billy Miller. Billy Miller, fascinating character. Billy Miller was actually wounded in the South African War and went on to captain the Springboks in a future test. He had been seriously wounded. AFW Marsburg, as well as three-quarter WC Martese, they had also served for the British forces during the war. Yet it also included burghers who had supported the Boer republics. And we talked about this yesterday, Bruce. W.S. Moore, a relative of yours, imprisoned and on St. Helena. So you now have Morkel here at the back, playing alongside Billy Miller. They're now playing rugby together. What would they have done if they met each other 4 years earlier on a battlefield? It's mind-boggling to feel that these men are now playing in the same scrum, on the same field. They're socialising together. Now that was something that it took me a while to get my head around. And of course there's complexities with society, but rugby had this effect. These men realised that this tour was more important than just what was happening on the pitch. It was what was happening beyond the try line that was the most important thing. But so given, I'm not the first person to make these observations about it, of course, other people have written about it on a certain level. So given its status, much has been written about the tour itself, with early accounts by Piggott and Placknow, followed by Gifford, and more recently there was a book by Laubscher and Neiman called The Caroline Papers. I don't think you've ever come across that book. The Caroline Papers. The Caroline, because Paddy Caroline, H.W. Caroline, the vice captain. Incredible. He was some character. He recorded a lot. He was basically the record keeper, the unofficial record keeper on the tour. So he wrote diaries, kept photographs, etc. And his son, Duncan Caroline, the late Duncan Caroline, I had the pleasure of meeting him during my research. And can you imagine a man answers the door in Newlands and he looks exactly like his father? It was quite spooky. He answers the door and we sat down, and then he just in front of me, he showed me his father's collection. But I hadn't got to him first. Unfortunately, Laubscher and Neiman had got there and produced, undoubtedly, a beautiful coffee table book. But I think they've used this man's trust. His big regret was they went off with a lot of the paraphernalia, and the book didn't sell or create probably the impression it should have done. So it wasn't marketed very well. But if you do see a copy of that, it's a beautiful book and it has some incredible photographs. So we have this makeup of this team, which is fascinating. And of course, during my talk, I'm going to unpick the characters because we're going to talk about the captain, Paul Russ, and Yappy Krieger, and the various rugby credentials of these men, as well as their personal lives as well, which I think is really interesting. I think the most important thing to think about is when you think about the actual players is their motivations for doing so. Now, whether they thought that this was a tour for the good of the country and to bring people together, these were young men who were enjoying their first visit overseas. This, by the way, is the original 1906 cap that they were awarded. With the exception of only two, W. Neal and J.G. Hurst, the South African players had never even seen England before. Landing in Southampton on the 19th of September, of course, an identity was needed, and soon one was established and promoted within the British press, with the team calling themselves the Springboks and adopting the myrtle green jerseys adopted during the previous tour. On the field, the tour was an unprecedented success. In all, South Africa played 28 matches in Britain, winning 25, losing 2 and drawing 1. Do you know who they lost to? Wales. No, that was the All Blacks, remember. They lost to the Scots, can you believe? I mean, jeez. They lost to the Scots, and just before I think they were fed up, the last tour on British soil before they went over and played in France, and beat the French, by the way, was they lost to Cardiff Rugby Football Club. Interestingly enough. But I think by then the social side of the tour had probably caught up with them. But they lost to the Scots. There was a draw, and how about this for the ultimate diplomacy? Who did they draw against? You got it. 3-all. You talk about diplomacy, this man understood it. Paul Russ, I've written a lot about Paul Russ. Of course, the legacy lives on in Stellenbosch. I've got dear friends at that school named after this man. And would you believe, and this is making me shiver, and I've got to pay homage to these wonderful ladies, in 2006, on the centenary of the first ever tour, so the centenary of the Springboks, I had the honour of some of my work being shown at the RFU Museum in Twickenham. And they asked me to come along and do a talk. And there, would you believe, I was introduced to 3 old ladies. 2 English-speaking South African sisters and 1 Afrikaans lady. The Afrikaans lady was Dietz Liebenberg, the youngest daughter of Paul Russ. The two English speakers were the Miller sisters, Mary and Julie. And I tell you what, they travelled together, but it was like the Boer War. They just perfectly in time. It was incredible. And I got to know those dear old ladies. And unfortunately, Dietz only passed away last year, Mary the year before. So up until recently, Paul Russ's daughter was still around. It was incredible. She's like a matriarch at Paul Russ School, if you can imagine that. But anyway, As we can see, the real significance went beyond rugby. The players, as members of the Springbok team, were not only sportsmen, but representatives too for the entire united white South African nation. And this man, Paul, was, of course, a school teacher in Stellenbosch, very religious man. He would not play rugby on a Sunday, famously. He would cycle miles for a rugby match, and an incredible athlete as well. Came up with this quote: "The tour has united us from Cape Agulhas to the Zambezi. South Africa was one, and all differences have been forgotten. Here we are one, may it always be the same." And he was very good at those after-dinner speeches, which were just as important as the performance on the pitch. Every time a game was played in whichever centre, these men would socialise in the evening at dinner, and Paul Ross or the manager would get up of various players and make these speeches. But Paul Ross, especially being an Afrikaner, was symbolic of what this team stood for. But what about here, back in South Africa itself? Well, the team's progress had seemingly galvanised the rugby supporting population, and each victory was met with great enthusiasm. Following the win in Swansea against Wales, the sportsman reported, and I quote, "Cheering crowds marched through the streets for hours afterwards." Maybe an exaggeration, but no. The media clearly appropriated the unifying nature of South African sporting success. "No touring side," and I quote, "no touring side that has visited our shores from Greater Britain has secured a larger degree of popularity," was another comment within the British press. In fact, the team's success was indeed seen as something from which both sides of South Africa's white society could draw a collective pride. So not for the first time, political leaders too seized upon the unifying qualities of sporting success. Mayor Lieberman of Cape Town proclaimed in his speech of welcome to the returning teams. He said, "We now understand each other better, and if this is going to be one of the results of the tour, we should be more than satisfied." Sir J.H. de Villiers, the Chief Justice, added, "I believe in all sincerity that this tour has done more to dispel racial ill-feeling than any other event of recent years." So on the surface, in any case, the 1906-07 tour was being heralded as an unprecedented success. Britain's influence throughout its growing empire was supported, as we've seen, by the sports laws of the late 1800s. But this was a two-way process. The visits by British teams to South African shores during 1891 and 1896 were part of the process of cultural imperialism and perhaps domination, while in 1906, the first ever South African tour to Great Britain was used as a reconciliatory tool to unite the white races in the face of a larger African population. So the significance of the 1906 Springboks lay in the fact that the side, unlike 1903, contained a greater mix of English speakers and Afrikaners. So despite several of the players fighting for opposing sides during the war, the tour, for the first time since the conflict, fielded a national rugby side that was fully representative of the whole of white South Africa. And as I mentioned, I interviewed Duncan Carolyn, the son of Paddy, a number of years ago. Paddy had played for South Africa both against the British in 1903 and 1906. And his son could never recall his father ever being worried about the relationship between Britain and Boer during those tours. His father, he believed, along with the other players, were well aware of the benefits of reconciliation which these encounters with the British promoted. Certainly much was also done to destroy the stereotyped images created by propaganda in Britain during the war. Proof of this is a letter John T. Tulloch, President of the Scottish Rugby Union, wrote to the Vice-Captain, Paddy Carolyn, just prior to the team's departure. Tulloch commented, I quote, "I believe there were many people here who thought of the Boer as a creature who was hardly human, but your team have altered that to the other extreme." So that propaganda did a very good job in creating that enemy overseas, as we mentioned yesterday. The significance of this, of course, was far-reaching. Overseas, the Britain had been offered an alternative impression of an old adversary, while in South Africa there was at last common interest between both factions. So while Afrikaners may have gone on to imbue rugby with more explicit national and ethnic characteristics than the English-speaking whites, both groups were, at least, united in their support of the Springboks and in their identification with Springbok success. The success of 1903 and the 1906 tour had certainly gone some way to achieving this. But what of reality? Well, With the benefit of hindsight, which is a wonderful thing, of course, it does appear that the rugby men and politicians have been too sanguine in 1907 when they stressed the unifying effect the rugby tours have had on relations between the white groups in South Africa. Despite the formation of the Union in 1910, we know that English-Afrikaner disputes in political and social spheres did not disappear as they wrestled for domination in South Africa. In fact, as we saw yesterday, the divisions were set to deepen as Afrikaners sought independence from imperial rule, a strategy that would of course have ramifications for all sport within South Africa. For while rugby and Springbok success may have been used to help unify the white groups in the early 1900s, history would show us that by the 1940s, Afrikaner nationalists had taken a keen interest in making rugby distinctly Afrikaner. In 1948, we now know that the Afrikaner-led National Party was elected and the policies of apartheid were formally implemented. So this brings us up to an obvious comparison. While it certainly shouldn't be overlooked, I believe rugby in 1995 almost came full circle. Because of the history that I probably looked into greater depth than you may have expected at the start of the week, the history of the late 1800s and what was happening at the turn of the century then, we created these identities. And that's what led us to 1995 and, of course, that historic moment. We know, of course, how Mandela in 95 emphasised the reconciliatory nature of rugby in South Africa when he handed that man, Francois Pienaar, the Rugby World Cup trophy. However, as I have shown here, it's not the first time that politicians have recognised the power of sport in that way. Nevertheless, history has also shown that we need look no further than the game of rugby in South Africa as a perfect example of sport being used as a tool of reconciliation. And I couldn't leave us without, let us go without showing you this clip. A significant sporting story, of course, for the Americans and Hollywood to cast their eyes this way, and certainly when it comes to rugby. When I talk about South Africa, that's the first thing I give my students homework, to go and watch a film, which is quite nice, isn't it? Despite its flaws, the film, etc., maybe the casting, and I don't know, and it's glorified, of course. The point is that Hollywood made a story about something that happened here in 1995 on a rugby pitch, and what was going around there. And for me, it's synonymous with what we've been talking about this week. What's happening beyond the try line is as important on the pitch. And of course, the victory that day against the New Zealanders was crucial. I don't know what would happen if it had gone the other way. It was very close, of course. I think in terms of as a historian, for me, it's important to understand what's happening in the past, to understand what's happening today, and there's probably a discussion we can have now in the next quarter an hour before we go off. But 1995 was significant because of what it represented. But what I decided to do was dig back a bit deeper, to show Mandela wasn't the first politician that appropriated rugby with some kind of unifying message. And of course, what had happened in 1906 was a war that was fought between the two white groups, and now, as I said, we had players who fought against each other. And I thought that was pretty profound in terms of analysis. So I'm going to wrap up by just really recapping what we've done this week. And I hope it was a tough thing. It was a tough thing to come to South Africa and give a course on rugby. You're hiding to nothing, really. I expected a tougher crowd, so thank you very much in terms of that. It's a nice intimate group. We met some wonderful people along the way, which is great. But for me, as I said, history should teach us where we are today and where we're going in the future. And that's why I hope, even what we were doing on Monday and Tuesday, looking at how sport evolved. You can do that in an hour, and how it spread around the world. At the same time as it was rising here in South Africa, and looking at the identities of sport here and now today, and how, as we encourage our youngsters to play sport and whatever, and the sports they choose, they have particular significance. So on Wednesday we looked at South Africa in particular, and of course we had to address what's happened post-48 and what happened prior to democracy reaching South Africa. And rugby was entrenched within that, and all that was embroiled in. And then yesterday and today, I've gone back to probably what my specialist area is, which is the late Victorian period, this idea that the British Empire took its culture around the world. And what a game that came to South Africa that was that important that Hollywood, and Clint Eastwood no less, made a film about. And I just think that story is incredible, and it probably would have reached a far wider audience and made a bigger impact if the game was baseball or whatever. But because it was rugby, perhaps that limited its appeal or its impact on a wider audience. But certainly here in South Africa, we know that rugby is a game that goes beyond the try line, and that's been the case. So I'm going to wrap it up there, and we've got time, and if you'd like to raise anything or whatever, or if you want to do the usual and escape early on a Friday, you're more than welcome to the door. Yes?
I'd like to tell you an interesting story about my father, who went to Stellenbosch University as an Englishman at the age of 19 in 1932, and he was inaugurated into the Cossacks by getting lowered into a bath of electrified water. But he survived that. But he then got selected for the Stellenbosch under 19A, and then he got selected the following year for the first team, and he went on tour with the first team to the Eastern Cape. And his description of the initiation procedure was absolutely horrific, because he was the only English speaker in the whole Cossacks. But his time as a rugby player with the Afrikaners, he says, was absolutely fantastic. He said he was always treated with the greatest respect, and he never had any kind of bad things to say about his fellow rugby players.
Well, that's the unifying aspect.
That was 1923.
But the initiation was pretty tough.
The initiation was terrible. Yeah.
Which house was he in?
The bad one.
Not Vilkenhof.
Vilkenhof.
Well, you're the first to even tell me what the initiation is, so I used to ask people, don't ask. It was the, you hear it and you know.
Johnny Craven was the Waterloo film.
Was he?
Yeah.
I've got a story about that. I used to park in the Wilkenhof car park near the Hospital Library. I did it for three days running. And I just got this rather poorly written note, but it just said, "You've been watching, you don't park here again." Yes. Different. Yeah, there's something special about that. Yes.
So one of the courses I've done was on the Spanish flu in summer school. And, well, I had no idea between 50 and 100 million people in the world died from Spanish flu. But South Africa was very heavily affected in the 1918-1919. And the flu affected predominantly young people between the ages of 18 and 40. So these servicemen were coming down from England, and the ships arrived in Cape Town, and 300,000 people died. Many of them were young men in that age group, and others were pregnant women. And one just wonders, because what you've said is that the guys in the military played rugby, etc. Did that? I know we didn't play during the war, but after the war, was there a fallout from the young boys who'd been actually wiped out by the Spanish flu?
That's interesting. And it was the period, can you just remind me?
1918, 1919.
Okay, so it was during the First World War.
Right at the end of the World War.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not aware of that. I'll look into that, yeah.
300,000 South Africans died. We were the third most hit country percentage-wise in the world. And Europe and England were not that heavily affected by death. The flu came in three waves. The first wave made people sick but didn't kill them. And the second wave followed quite soon afterwards. The people in England and Europe had been made immune because of the first wave. But the guys who came down here were just exposed for the first time to the second wave, and they died like flies.
And I'm assuming, given its flu, you have to be in contact with people to catch it. So is it more prevalent in urban areas than in the...
Well, what happened is these people were brought by ship after the war into Cape Town, and they were kept actually in Rosebank, in some area in Rosebank, in quarantine for 2 days.
Wow.
But the 2 days weren't long enough because apparently our rail system was extremely well developed in those days.
It was.
And people went onto the trains to be taken home. And for instance, the R station, people were just lying dead all around the place.
The R being the Clapham Junction, the crew station.
And Hidley too was badly affected. So it would be really interesting to know what impact that had.
I'll
The
take
guy
that.
was Howard Phillips, and he's a professor, I think, of medical history here.
Oh, fantastic.
It was an excellent presentation. He had it.
History, yeah. I know that name. It's quite high up.
It was excellent.
Yeah. Well, that is interesting. Yeah, you talk about the rail network. Just have to look at I've got a rail network image in the book in 1899 at the outbreak of the war. Literally, the railway covered everywhere. You know, there were offshoots taking whatever. No, it's scandalous what's happened to the railway. You just see these lines that. No, but in terms of rugby, yeah, you can overlook these kind of. I'm just thinking about the timing of that. Yeah, that's going certainly to hit rugby in terms of leagues and whatever. And following the First World War, and it's significant perhaps that we talked about yesterday, the 20s and the 30s of this growth post First World War, this emergent nationalism that led to things in the future. Now rugby was adopted during that time. Because it wasn't straight away, it took a while. It wasn't straight after the end of the war. There had to be some period of sort of recovery, as it were, for this movement to happen. Yes.
May I share with everyone here an interest? I think it's interesting. The '95 World Cup at the final, the trophy was handed to Madiba by the president of the International Rugby, who was then an Irishman called Sir Ewart Bell. His first name was Ewart, spelled E-W-A-R-T. Now, Bruce has been at the school he attended, he's been at the university he attended, and he's been at his rugby club. So Bruce knows this to be a true story. After the World Cup was over, Ewart Bell came back to Belfast, and on the Saturday night at the rugby club having a pint, and they were all asking him, what was it like at the World Cup final? He said, what was it like? That bloody man Mandela told me Ewart the whole day. So, of course, from then until he died, he was called Ewart.
They say about Mandela, incredible memory for names, so I'm sure he could call me once again. That was the thing. Can anybody just recount their memories? We were talking earlier on, we were at a meeting with James Bell, and he said he was there, and I just think, was anybody there that day? Were you there? Wow. What was it like?
This was fantastic.
It was different than anything.
Absolutely powerful. Well, spine-chilling, really. It was fantastic.
And how low did that 747 fly, was it?
Yeah, it was low.
Was it?
I don't know how they got permission to do that, to be honest. It was
Yeah.
low.
I mean, they make a big thing of it in the film, like it's going to be some kind of terror attack, don't they? And then it comes and, yeah, that was...
When even watching on TV, there were two things that I remember apart from the excitement. So, was the aeroplane and PJ Powers
Yes.
singing World of Union. And if you watch it carefully, she like gets carried away on a wave. She almost chokes while she's singing. She was apparently chosen by Mandela as well. They were friendly with him. And that's almost a sort of hidden reconciliation, if you like, because she was well known to black South Africans, but also well loved by white South Africans. So, very much a unifying world in union.
No, I think that was the genius of the man. I mean, the diplomacy, as a politician, to be able to the whole thing. And I think, as I said, I mean, on the actual pitch, they should have beaten the teams. I mean, that was the thing. It was a war of retrenchment, wasn't it? It wasn't. Let's face it, but it was the way that it was going to happen. But that was when the machine was at its height, wasn't it? It was just.
The previous game against the French was I thought, well, that's it, we're out.
Yeah.
Having beaten Australia, hooray, but that was it. So now we're out. But yeah.
Who refereed the final?
Wasn't it the English guy? The title machine.
Yes.
Crittenton?
No.
I think he had a moustache, did he, or was it?
It was
Bradbury.
Englishman.
Bradbury?
No.
Crittenton? Roger Crittenton?
He was the guy who used to work quite a few of them. He was quite sort of schoolmasterish about giving penalties and everything. Little thin guy. Yeah, that's why I remember. But
No, it was an incredible moment, and as I said, it didn't cure everything. And as we looked on Wednesday, there was a lot of trouble still to come, and we're still battling with